The next witness is Scott Mayer.
Mr. Mayor, would you swear?
Swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Scott Mayer, is it?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Mayer, are you appearing here today and testifying under oath voluntarily?
Yes, I am.
Have you been paid by anyone for your testimony other than expenses for coming to Clearwater?
Not at all.
You have a lawsuit against the Church of Scientology.
No.
Does the Church of Scientology have a lawsuit against you?
Yes.
Has anyone suggested to you that you should state anything but the truth, or has anyone suggested that you change your testimony for any reason?
Not at all.
Okay. Would you like to make a statement?
Yes, I would. I find it a little bit difficult to distill 12 years of experience with the church, and I was a senior executive with the church for approximately 7 of those years, so it's to distill all of that information into a small period of time here is kind of difficult. So I've prepared an outline of things that I would like to touch on, and in kind of a rapid sequence, and after that's through, I'm willing to answer questions about any of the areas I touch on, if that's agreeable to you.
Yes, sir. Why don't you just follow your outline, and then we can ask you questions when you've completed your outline.
Oh, okay, fine. I basically just wanted to let you know what I'm doing now. I work on an on-call basis as a legal assistant and administrative assistant for the city of Santa Monica in the city attorney's office and the environmental services area. And I work for also as a consultant to the Internal Revenue Service with the current U.S. tax case that's been going on for some time, and worked with the senior counselor for the IRS during that tax case as a consultant. The tax case I'm referring to is the time period of I believe it's 68 through 71 in the U.S. tax court. Judge Sterrett. The Internal Revenue Service. In terms of the organization, I entered the administration as a result of having a ship's master training program being offered to me. At one time during the Vietnam War, I was on a navigation team for the flagship of the 7th Fleet, and used to run aircraft carriers in and out of various harbors around the world, so I had quite a bit of ship experience when I was first exposed to Scientology, and I was offered a training program that would get me a full master's certificate, and I went in on that basis, that and an educational program. What I want to do real quickly here is just to give you some sort of a background of what I did, because I went all over the world for the church for a long time, and on basically a troubleshooting basis. And the main point that I think I really want to stress here and bring out from an insider's point of view is the overall administrative structure of the church, because a great deal of publicity has been put out that your individual churches are corporate bodies unto themselves with their own board of directors, and many of the boards of directors around the planet that they publicize, I worked with those directors, and they were just common everyday staff members who signed papers when it was necessary. So I want to kind of go over the post areas that I held my jobs so that you can see what kind of a background I had, and it'll probably make it a little easier for you to ask direct questions later. I have been at one time or another everything from a bodyguard to the now deceased Quentin Hubbard to the fleet captain for the Hubbard's fleet of ships on the West Coast. I was an executive troubleshooter for top management of the church. I went on a few missions out of Clearwater under the control of the Church of Scientology as an administrative director. in other words, as a command team. They're the basic command organization for the entire Church of Scientology. When I left in 1966, was situated right here, and 76, excuse me, was situated here in Clearwater, and had been on the flagship Apollo. I was the ship's manager just prior to the move here, and part of my job was getting the ship ready to come in here. I did approximately 18 successful missions for the senior top management of the church all over the world, including South Africa, Scotland, Manchester, St. Hill in England. I worked with Guardian's Office staff members. I worked with Jane Kember, and I worked with Mo Budlong. Did an intelligence mission in Scotland for the church while I was there in well, Jane Kember was the guardian for the Church of Scientology, the head of the Guardian's Office below Mary Sue Hubbard. Mary Sue Hubbard was Commodore's staff guardian, which Commodore's staff were the assistants to the Commodore, to Ron, in each of the divisional areas of the church: finance, dissemination, public relations. Ron had a staff member, a Commodore staff for each one of those areas. Here in Clearwater, they did evaluations on a weekly basis for the entire worldwide network of the church. And on the basis of the financial well-being of various organizations around the world, missions, people who were top management trained would go out to various organizations to jack the income back up because it was down. And your whole control or command information center for those evaluations sat here in Tampa after the ship came in here, and the flag was moved into the Fort Harrison Hotel. So that's just a little kind of a background of the type of thing I did. I acted primarily as a troubleshooter. When things would go wrong, I'd be sent out to make them to go right. The reason I left Scientology, by the way, was because of the things that I saw and participated in through my tenure with the church. It got to the point where I could no longer, in my own mind, justify what the church's policy for handling government agencies and the society it was allegedly there to save. I could no longer reconcile that with the stated aims of the church. To jive. So I resigned from the Sea organization while on a leave of absence in 1976 and was subsequently expelled by the church. Part of the reason I wanted to come down here was that I had talked to Martin Cohn, who's the senior counselor for the IRS in the tax case, about a week or so ago, and I asked him if there was anything that I could do for them while I was down here in terms of bringing back information. And one of the things that he said to me is, he said, Scott, we've been a year at this now, and I'm still on an on-call basis with them as a consultant. He said, if I had realized what you were trying to tell me a year ago, we could have taken a whole different tact with this case. And what I have observed, and I have to admit to you that I've stayed pretty well in hiding for the last 3 years. After I had an experience where my car was blown up on Christmas Eve in 1978 in front of a place where the church thought I was staying, but I was living elsewhere. I had planted that information in the church so that I'd know if they were ever trying to contact me. So I've stayed pretty much in hiding, and I feel that these hearings are a chance for a little bit of light to come out on this, so that people who are out in the field now, and I know a lot of them, I'm small potatoes compared to what some of the people out in the field have, the things that they've done and experienced, and I would like very much for them to feel free to be able to rejoin society and contribute to it, because that, in essence, was their main concern and reason for going into church in the first place, was to help evolve the planet. There's a tendency to kind of group Scientologists together in terms of the reflection that top management is presented. But the average staff member is nothing more, as far as I'm concerned, than a psychological, psychopolitical dupe. The organization is structured in such a manner that everything is done on a need-to-know basis, much like security in the military. And evaluations are done to keep various areas of the church operating on their own goals and purposes without really knowing what's going on in another area. Although there is an incredible grapevine that goes through the Church of Scientology. I had an amusing incident about a week ago where I told a story to someone who was no longer in Scientology at a place in Los Angeles, California, and within a week the story had gone across country through some Scientologists and back through a friend of my wife's, and back to me, and the person that I talked to could no longer get any information about the church. But it took a week, just person to person, to get the story. And I won't bother with the story, it's just a funny anecdote, that's all. Getting back to my original point, I'm basically here today to try to impress you with the magnitude of the operation that you are facing, and I want you to know in certain terms that there is constant evaluation of this hearing going on and all of the things that have happened up to now. And right over here in their Combat Information Center, if that's where they still got it, evaluations are being done on how to handle you. And I would like to see the tables turned for a change, because I don't believe what they're doing is ethical. The points that I would like to cover today are basically violations of clear-cut public policy, such as the registration and operation of maritime vessels, violations of those rules, transportation of funds in and out of the United States illegally, the violation of federal communications regulations on the use of telex and radio communication equipment, transportation of personnel into and out of the country in violation of immigration laws, conspiracy to impede the IRS, the use of cruel and unusual punishment, and in to defraud the United States Postal Service, and I have personal experience with the church in all of those areas. Also, the ill treatment of children and parishioners, living conditions. I've traveled to almost all of the organizations around the world, and Clearwater is just another step in the whole game. In accounting, we talk about the normal course of business and business papers, things that are written out and done standardly pretty much on a day-to-day basis, notes, CPA's notes. Well, the church has a standard operating basis. It has an incredible amount of policy that it can show you to tell you that it's not doing anything, but to someone who's really well trained in their policy, they can show you a policy that makes it be all right. So what you continuously have a facade being put forth to the public about what's church policy, but there is a corollary, a corresponding policy that would make it all right to violate that policy.
Superseding policy?
Yes. Well, it happens to be a crime in the church to impede Scientology, and any staff member would be, severely punished in terms of the organization for impeding the progress, the expansion of Scientology. That they're called high crime policies. Fair game policy is part of that, which is allegedly canceled, but I have never found a church official that could show me the policy that canceled it, because it would have to be written by Ron Hubbard and specifically deny that policy, not the little caption that's printed down at the bottom. I printed those captions. I used to be Deputy Pubs Chief U.S. in the early 70s. We put them on all the policy letters, but it didn't cancel anything, and certainly not the way an ethics officer would handle a person who was trying to impede the progress of the church. In terms of the fair game policy itself, of course, I have no way of proving that the Church of Scientology blew up my car. I just have the knowledge within myself that that's where I told them I was, and that's where it got blown up. The fact that I didn't live there was to my credit, not theirs. So, in testifying before the U.S. Tax Court the day after my address went on the record, I was sued by the church by my ex-wife, who's, I presume, still in Scientology. The transcript hadn't even been published yet, and they had my name and address and had a little kid come out and serve me the papers. So I was being sued, and I subsequently moved, and I was under IRS protection at the time anyway. I was in a safe house, so I moved, and I've been moving ever since. They also pulled out my what's called a B1 file during the Scientology hearings, and what it basically is a list of the things that I have done wrong in the past that came out of my confessional folders. I'm kind of getting a little out of sequence here in terms of what I wanted to talk to you about, but since the point has been brought up, there is a statement by the church that confessional folders are not available to anybody but the auditor or the minister. And I can't tell you the number of folders that I looked at when I was going around various organizations trying to get the income up, because I had to know what was going on with the people in order to get them back in line and get them doing their job. They brought out my B1 file. I didn't even know it was that thick. I was rather flattered. I didn't know that they could get that much stuff out of it. But there were a couple of files sitting right next to me at in the courtroom that had my name on it, and they didn't have anything else but my confessional folders and my B1 file. The B1 file comes out of the confessional folders. It's a timed sequence, a date-time sequence list of all of the things that they feel they can use with it. Yeah, that's a very good point. This was during the second day of the trial in Los Angeles, California, that the file appeared.
Which trial is that you're talking about?
This was the U.S. Tax Court trial. The approximate time would have been around February of last year. In about February of last year. I was about 2 days into it. You have to realize my function during the trial was when the Scientologists would get up on the stand and tell their version of what was going on with the church, whenever they would either directly lie or when they would present a policy letter that was supposed to tell what their policy was on the subject that was being discussed, I would reach over to Mr. Cohen and I would direct him to the policy letter, the definition that opposed that. So I was not very popular with the church's attorney, because we started shooting holes in their story. So the next couple of days after that, my folders arrived, and it was just nothing more than a standard attempt to intimidate me and let me know that they were going to try to make public what was in my confessional folders. Well, I would willingly let any one of you read them now, because there isn't anything that anybody's going to do to me anyway. I did what I did. I've been what I've been, and I've either learned from it or I haven't. So I don't have any secrets that way. But it was an attempt to intimidate me.
Is that about when your car was blown up?
No, that was in 1978, and I had been moving around. In addition, several Guardian's office members appeared at friends of mine's houses looking for me during the trial. In fact, the day before I was supposed to appear, I got a telephone call from a Karen Kuiper who was originally out of the Minneapolis organization and married to Bob Kuiper, also a Guardian's Office staff member. She and another girl harassed a friend of mine down in Laguna Beach while they were trying to get in touch with me before I went ahead and testified. The other areas that I would like to cover with you is how Scientology actually operates against the best interest of your community, and possibly touch on some things that I believe would help you in the incredible job that you've got of making ordinances out of all of this when it's done. So I'd like to get back to the use of various telex equipment, so on and so forth. During the course of my time in Scientology, as a senior executive, I was on call 24 hours a day. I could be on course in Los Angeles and be ordered into briefing because a set of flag mission orders had come in ordering me to Austin, Texas, or Boston, or Florida, or South Africa, and I'd have about 15 or 20 minutes to get my stuff together and get in a briefing. And incidentally, one of my jobs when I first got into the upper level executive structure was briefing couriers on how to get things in and out of the country. I probably have 100 briefing tapes of people, couriers, that I briefed on how to get through the various immigration, customs officials, postal officials, attempts, to get things out of the country. I have been personally involved with people who have brought money in and out of the United States. My ex-wife and I smuggled $2,000 worth of rand apiece into Clearwater on our last mission from South Africa in 1976.
$2,000 worth of what?
Rand, Kruger rand.
Oh.
That's the form of currency there. So I'm familiar with the fact that it isn't just an accident if some money gets out of the country. It's a regular established procedure. There's an interesting thing about the procedure too, because on the face of it, it looks like everyday business activities and students coming in and out and so on and so forth, which is of course exactly what it's supposed to look like. A Scientologist, for instance, in Los Angeles that was going to come to Clearwater to get some training would be taken into the briefing room in Los Angeles and briefed on techniques of getting through various governmental agencies. They would even go so far as to be play demoed, that they would do play demonstrations of the ways that they were going to do it. What if this happened? And I would grill them on all of the possibilities, all of the things that I thought that they could run into, until I was certain that they could pass a security check, which is nothing more than a lie detector test. And they could go down and they could say that they understood their mission and they knew how to carry it out, and they had no other reason for going but to carry their mission out. And this was routine. They were routinely checked on a lie detector to make sure that they'd actually got what I was trying to tell them, and didn't have any other reasons for doing it. But we might send out 12 or 15 people in a week to Clearwater, to other places earlier where Flag was. I was also, at the time, I covered what was called operations in the United States. I was directly under what was then the Continental Commander for the United States area. I handled external communications, telex transmissions, church management across the United States on a supervisory level, and data evaluations, organization analysis. I would analyze things that were going on in various churches around the country and devise programs or plans that people could be sent out on to raise the income level of the organization. So I might brief 10 or 12 people a week to go out to Flag, and my external communications chief would have pre-wrapped, using two sets of wrappers, the first wrapper for whatever was going out would have the liaison office address on it for wherever the package was going to go through before it was mailed, before it got the flag. And the second one would be a phony address and a phony corporate name on it. And at one time, when I first inherited the job, we maintained 5 different phony companies that things were shipped out of Los Angeles to various parts of the world. And all of the packages, as I said, had an outer wrapping and then an inner wrapping, so that when the courier successfully got out of the country, the wrapping could be taken off at the liaison office and then forwarded to the next checkpoint. After the couriers were briefed by me, they were sent down to finance, where they would be given packages to courier to flag. None of the couriers, because of the fact that the packages were pre-wrapped, knew who had the loot or who had what. They were all instructed to act as though they were just corporate papers. And that was part of the standard everyday briefing. And people, well, I was briefed on 3 missions here in Clearwater, and I took documents out of the country. I was sent out as a tourist to South Africa and England and Scotland from Clearwater, and came back here and debriefed, and then went out again. I have to say to you in all frankness that when I stumbled across the little invoice fixing project on flags. I was the ship's manager of the Apollo just before it came in here to Florida. The church was doing a little invoice changing project directly underneath our office on the ship, and I got my wife and I sent out on missions because I didn't want to be here when the IRS hit them when they got into Clearwater. So I was probably not quite the perfect Scientologist in that respect, but I just couldn't see how they could get away with it. And as it turns out, they're not, which is great.
I'd just like to make a legal point for the Commission here. This background and the relevance and importance of all this testimony is that the allegation in the report and the considerations for the Commission are that the goals, purposes, representations, policies of the church are misrepresented to people here in Clearwater as what they're paying for, what the nature of the organization is, and that these policies with regard to what the nature of the organization is are uniform, and therefore important to your consideration is whether there are uniform policies that have been in practice for many years right up to the present time here in Clearwater, which are in direct contradiction to those represented policies as to the nature of the organization for which people are paying millions of dollars for here in Clearwater. So from a legal point of view, all of this testimony is extremely important.
Mr. Kohlerbank has a quick question.
Yeah, I've got a legal point, Mr. Flynn. One of the newspaper reporters that's reporting on this legislative hearing continually refers to allegations. In fact, your allegations as these witnesses come up, and for the benefit of the public and the viewing public, especially at home, I'd like to have that, if it need be, corrected. Is this testimony and are these documents coming in before this city commission? Are they as the paper says, and are they your allegations, or what are they? What do we consider them?
Well, first of all, I haven't been sworn under oath yet. I'm not the one testifying, so obviously they're not mine. Right. Secondly, perhaps whoever you're quoting should go to law school to realize the significance of what's being done.
So it is evidence.
When the final report is prepared and the items of evidence that have been introduced so far and will be introduced the rest of the afternoon are presented to the Commission together with the proposals for the ordinances, the significance of them will become quite plain.
So they're not allegations, they're evidence.
That's correct.
It's a good point, Mr. Kohlerbank. Many people have read those allegations, and I'm glad it was cleared up, at least now understood.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
I'd like to just say something about what just transpired here. I have not heard any of the testimony that's gone on before me, except a couple of minutes of the last person as you were closing. I'm not here to make any legal allegations in terms of a trial or anything like that. I'm here to state to you in no uncertain terms that there is only one Church of Scientology. There's only ever been one Church of Scientology. Its entire management operation has been run from Ron Hubbard through Mary Sue Hubbard through the Guardian's office. The Sea Organization, which is the arm of the church that carries out Ron's administrative policy demands, it has always been that way. There has never been a board of directors that has ever operated autonomously within the church in any organization that I have ever been in, and I've been in almost all of them. One of the persons that I did a mission, for instance, Denny Goggly in St. Hill, England, is allegedly one of the officers of the Church of Scientology. I did a mission with him. He was nothing but a clerk. We did a mission to Scotland to handle a guy that was messing up an organization there, and we used his confessional file and his B1 file and knowledge of communist activities on his part and involvement that he had had with a stolen goods ring to run him out of the area and stop interfering with the church operations. Mr. Goggly had never, ever been in a position, he was kind of a laughable kind of guy, as a matter of fact. There was no way that he was intellectually capable of being an officer of a worldwide organization, let alone the mother church in England.
Could you have him define mission, what he is talking about?
A mission is a specific set of objectives. If I say I went on a mission, that means that there was a specific area that needed to be handled within one of the churches, and in a step-by-step sequence of action for rectifying that situation was laid out, and I was very thoroughly briefed on what to do and how to do it. I could walk into the organization and remove the executive director, whether he was the president of the church in that state or not. I could walk in and show him my missions orders and say, you're on your way to flag. Be ready in a half hour. And there wasn't going to be anybody that would give me any crap about it. Maybe I'm being a little strong in my language about it, but I'm trying to get across to you that a Sea Org member on a flag mission order or an L. Ron Hubbard personal mission, which I have been on, had unlimited ethics power in the organization, unlimited ability to walk in and remove the directors and send them packing, have them before what the church calls a committee of evidence, and have their confessional folders brought out, gone through, and charges made, and have them brought up before the committee on it. Nothing to it. That was just standard everyday stuff. The church is very fond of telling you that nobody has access to those confessional folders. It's just not true. Any missionary can order them. I used to order them brought into me so that I could see which people I wanted to take the time, because it's a very lengthy process to do a lie detector test on somebody, especially to the degree that the church does, to get into their personal history, their personal. It's looking for crimes against the church is what it's looking for. You see, it's against policy to impede the progress of the church. In fact, it's a crime not to practice Scientology. You can impede the church by not practicing. So it's very standard procedure to find out who's been doing what, bring them into the office and let them know that you know what they've been doing, what's been going on. One of the techniques that's also used is to go, well, listen, we know where there were some errors in your auditing. We know where there's some case problems here. Don't worry about it. As long as you produce, as long as your production is up, if the person was a registrar, their sales were up for the week, as long as you're doing that, don't worry, you'll get your auditing and we'll make everything all right for you. So I just want to really get that point across to you, that there is no separation of the various churches. In fact, before I left, I used to go into the data files while being briefed for a mission, and I could pull out. The church is very fond of saying there's no connecting financial reports, yet I could walk into the files and get a complete financial report on any organization around the world. Of course, we stuck pretty much to what we were doing for that particular mission, or what we were supposed to do there, but it's just simply not true that there aren't AC2 forms, which are the church's a breakdown of the gross income that comes into the church are standardly sent every Thursday night to what's called data files, so that over that weekend evaluations can be done by the Commodore staff, and if the income had dropped sufficiently in an area, a couple of people like myself could be gotten together and sent out as a team to straighten the area out and get the income going again.
One more legal point. The significance of the record-keeping process of the Church of Scientology, of which the witness has just testified about one little part of, is extremely significant, and we could testify for weeks on that subject alone. It's very significant to this commission because if the Church of Scientology does produce any witnesses, you may rest assured that any subject matters that the commission wishes to question them on, there have been extensive records kept on any of those subjects, as this witness is testifying now pursuant to corporate policy for many years. So if there were records pertaining to any educational processing that's been going on at Fort Harrison, clinics, patients being taken care of, people being taken care of and what they were treated for, children that were in the nursery, what type of education they received, what type of grades they received, guardian's office operations, any of hundreds of varieties of issues, you can rest assured, as the witness will testify, that there has been extensive record keeping about that issue. And so if a witness was brought onto the witness stand, he could be questioned in detail as to, for instance, if there was a school at Fort Harrison, where the school was, what dates the school was run, who attended the school, and what records there are pertaining to all of those items.
I think I can give you a real good example of how confessional folders are routinely used. I was fired on a mission from Clearwater into St. Hill, England. Flag had arrived at that point in time. This ties into the misuse of telex to mislead government officials too, because all of our missions were operated by Mr. Hubbard's son-in-law, who was sitting over here, or was sitting over here at the Fort Harrison, by telex. There was daily telex transmission from wherever we were in the world into Clearwater, into what was called the Action Bureau, where missions would be evaluated on a daily basis. As I said earlier, there were some problems in an organization in Scotland and in Manchester. I was for a short time loaned to the Guardian's Office Intelligence Bureau in St. Hill, England. I was shown a B1 file, an intelligence file that came from the pre-clear folders or the confessional folders of the person we were going up to deal with, which dealt with sexual misconduct, orgies, and so on and so forth of an executive director of the Manchester organization in St. Hill. His wife had already had split from him and had come down to St. Hill, more or less turn herself in and get back in the good graces, and she had supplied a lot of information. We walked into the organization, and I just sat the man down and told him what we knew, and told him he was on his way to St. Hill, and that if he got back in the good graces of the church, he could probably have his organization back. The man was a medical doctor who was also the executive director of one of the organizations. But I know of at least a half a dozen people who knew about the information that was in his confessional folder, and it was used to remove him as the executive director and get him back down to St. Hill for quote-unquote handling. Those operations were monitored via telex from the United States, from your city. Right here. There has never been a command line anywhere in Scientology that did not go through either the Guardian's office or the Commodore's staff to Ron and to Mary Sue. Wherever they have been, their aides have passed down their orders to the rest of the organization. When it moved here, Clearwater was no exception. The whole operation was here. There were just literally thousands and thousands of files. There was a room bigger than this one filled with file cabinets where they pulled off of the ship that contained the data of all the missions that had been sent out from Flag. All that information was available right here in your city. I read it, I used it, and did my job. I couldn't have done my job without it. I had to know what was going on in the organizations in order to be able to handle the people we were having trouble with.
Those files were here?
Here.
In Clearwater?
In the bank building, right over here. That's where I was briefed.
That's why they need a big vote.
Yeah, Mr. Hatch has raised a point. That's why they need a vault.
That's why they needed a big vote.
I would like to read
The potential legal ramifications of much of this witness testimony, as was Mr. Walter's testimony, although not known at the time, are broad-ranging, and at a later point in time, they'll be made plain. But virtually all of this testimony is extremely important with regard to the proposed ordinance.
I have a photostatic copy of the original, and by the way, the data that I'm going to talk to you about from this is available to the counselor. So if you need copies of it, you're more than welcome to it. I'm going to have to translate this somewhat to you, but because of the terminology, however, the terminology, you can look it up in your own version of the Scientology dictionary when you get the telex later on. But this telex was sent to the LRH's, L. Ron Hubbard's, personal secretary in the United States by L. Ron Hubbard's personal secretary on Flag, which was then located in the Netherlands Antilles. This was in, I believe, 1974 or 75. The name of the person was Ken Urquhart. He's well known as the LRH personal secretary. With translations, it reads to the LRH personal secretary, Toby, regarding the ship. At this time, I had just inherited the flotilla of ships in on the West Coast, and I became the fleet captain. I'm qualified to run any tonnage, any ocean, any weather. So I was qualified as the skipper, and I had just taken it over. But the ships were in very poor shape. They had been run by unqualified personnel who didn't know what they were doing, didn't know how to maintain them, and they were placing the church at risk, basically. I had taken in aircraft carriers through renovations while in the service. I took the Apollo through one, so I knew what I was doing, and I was appointed as the captain. However, the ship was sitting alongside the dock. You have to realize this ship it was 185 feet long, and it had a couple of hundred crew members on it. And it was costing the church $5,000 a week to sit there. That was our budget per week, $5,000. The church wanted it out, cruising up and down the coast, doing recruiting, doing events, public events where we could introduce people to Scientology and then usher them into the local organization, to the registrar, to be signed up for courses. The telex reads, leave the threat of the rehabilitation project forces hanging over them for now. And this was regards to the staff, the ship's officers that I inherited when I took on the post. Public officer, the ship's finance officer, the chief officer. These are people who had not, quote unquote, made it so far. It was costing a lot of money. It says, leave the threat of the rehabilitation force hanging over them for now. Have their confessional folders gone through listing all crimes found. Crimes must be verified as not auditor errors, and the criminals with the greatest treasonous action put on the rehabilitation project forces. The remainder are told that they have one more chance to come clean and go straight. Have their folders summarized and programmed for vital corrections, and then security checking, lie detector test. If then no mark changes, they go to the rehabilitation project forces. Regardless of any auditing or security checking, those not going to the RPF are to get on the ball and pull their weight to complete the ship's programs by the deadline already given. There's going to be no captain bill to reward you. They make it or they don't, and if they haven't woken up to that, wake them up. Love Earth, Ken Urquhart. Black and white on their own telex form that they order people to go into confessional folders. You may have a copy of it.
For the record, we will be presenting numerous actual telex operations and operations with confessional folders on the overhead projector at the appropriate time. And the significance of that issue, where probably per year thousands, perhaps tens of thousands, numbers unknown by this commission at this point, are coming to your city and paying millions of dollars, believing that all of that information that is being given to this organization is highly confidential, is of obvious legal significance.
I think the next point that I'd like to talk about in relation to what we've just gone over, the church's free use of telex lines, of confessional folders, and breaking an entry in order to gain an advantage of the community. In 1971, when I was running operations for the church, I was involved with a man whose name I don't care to give now, unless it's all right for me to. Okay. His name was Bill Foster. One of the people that he worked with on the operation is here today, so he could be called up to corroborate what I'm going to say to you. But I received a call from Mr. Bill Foster while in New York. I had been sent from the Apollo, which was operating in the Antilles at the time, to New York with my wife to operate the eastern seaboard for the church on a management mission. Mr. Foster had allegedly been expelled a couple of years earlier for misconduct or something in Boston. I received a call from Bill Foster, and he came into New York. We had been very close friends. He came in with an incredible story. He said that he had in actual fact been operating with the Guardian's office out of Boston and Washington, and involved in a breaking and entering team. His cover had been blown because one of the operatives had been compromised. At the time, I didn't know who that was. And the church was going to leave him high and dry. In other words, they were not going to acknowledge the fact that he had been working for them. They were holding the story that he had been expelled and was doing everything on his own. He came to me because at that time I was the senior executive authority on the Eastern Seaboard for the church and in direct contact with flag management. My mission was being run by telex on a daily basis. He asked me if I could assist him. I called the person who was then in charge of the Guardian's office in Boston, Mr. Bob Raymer, who had also been a friend of mine. I had worked with him on a mission some years earlier in Boston, and I said, I said, look, Foster's here, this is what he told me. Is it true? Has he been working for you in the field? And he said, yeah, he has. And I said, well, just on the basis of the misuse of policy and handling the man, I thought that I could help him out with flag management. I started to get a lot of heat down the telex lines about him and what he had done and so on and so forth. So I got him out of the country. I sent him to a mission in Canada, where up to a few months ago he was still residing, not being willing to come back to the United States, I suppose until the statute of limitations run out on his activities.
Some more detailed evidence pertaining to that particular subject will also be introduced at a later time. The legal significance of that testimony may relate to the disowning of the policies of the corporation to disown information or responsibility for the actions of its operatives, such as Mary Sue Hubbard and the other top 10 people who have just been convicted. And the significance to this city is the fact that the corporation is now disowning responsibility of those people for any of the things that took place here in Clearwater and around the world. And that disowning of responsibility process began last summer and is taking place right up to the present time. The inferences that could be drawn from the testimony of this witness regarding that policy to disown are becoming apparent on their face.
To elaborate on that even further, I'm not here to complain about what the church has done to me. Understand that. I'm here to really impress upon you what you're actually dealing with, the magnitude of what you're dealing with. In 1971, we had, and of course this ties into the treatment of children too, actually, because in 1971 we had a base in Mexico outside of Rosarito Beach. It was a 1,200-hectare base, and it had been put there as a training camp for Sea Org members, missionaries, and a place to put what was called the Cadet Org, the children's school. Children were routinely transported from Los Angeles to the Mexican base and birthed and housed there under the care of various base personnel so that their mothers and fathers could get on with their business within the church. A lot of them had staff positions, senior executive positions in the church in Los Angeles. We were having a great deal of problems at that time with the city officials. I don't know what the laws are here in Florida, but in Los Angeles, 1.1 person in a one-bedroom apartment, excluding kitchens and bathrooms, is considered overcrowded. Anything over than that. Of course, the church doesn't normally have bathrooms and kitchens in its little rooms, so quite frequently, in fact almost all of the time, rooms are incredibly overcrowded. So there was a place to get the kids out of the country and out of the way of production. Mexico, of course, at that time, and 10 years ago, was still pretty wild. In fact, there were bandit groups roaming the hills, and they used to come down to the base. The base fell under my sphere of responsibility as an operating project. I was in charge of operations. The bandits were coming in at night, and they were stealing grain, and they were stealing saddles, and whatever wasn't tied down, and whatever they could get away with, and causing a lot of commotion. And I was asked to go down with another ex-member of the church whose name I don't care to give you because he's still around. We were asked to go down there and eliminate the bandits. Both that person and myself have had extensive intelligence and counterintelligence activities in the armed forces. The person at that time had free access, in fact was dealing in arms at the time, and was routinely used by the church on various guardian operations. We were asked to go down and actually went into briefing to go down and set up a little infrared sniper scope in the middle of the night and make sure the bandits didn't bother us anymore. Fortunately for me, one of the ladies who was managing the children's org at the time shot one of the bandits, I believe it was the leader, through the front door when they were trying to break in, and they dispersed, and the mission was subsequently called off. I just want to get across to you that at that point in time with the church, that sort of thing, they were impeding Scientology. They were nothing but bandits, and they had to be gotten out of the way. And that was the way. I don't know what else to tell you about it. You can ask me questions about it if you like. All I can say was at the time I was willing to go. I don't necessarily feel good about that now, but at the time I didn't make any protest. I think since I've already mentioned children, I have in conditions in an area, I think I can say without any reservations that the food, the supervision of children, the education of children in every organization that I have ever been in the church, it's been terrible. I got into an incredible firefight with a person named Fran Broker, who was in charge at that time of financing the various operations in Los Angeles.
What do you mean by firefight?
Well, I was trying to get money for the base, and she had the power of pen. All right, and I had to make a plea for monies to adequately feed and house the children. And the problem that I had, and this is kind of a funny story in a way, but at the time for me it was really serious. The caretaker used to come up from Mexico on a weekly basis to get money to bring back down because they did their purchasing in Mexico because of the price difference. the area was incredibly infested with scorpions, snakes, tarantulas, spiders. The area around the base house had a lot of shrubbery up against the house, and the place had never really been made habitable. The man brought me up a jar full of scorpions, tarantulas, and laid at me. He says, "Look at it. He says, we've got to have money to clear this brush out. So one of these kids gets it. You and I are the ones that are going to be in trouble because we're responsible for the area. The rest of the church is going to take the rap if a kid gets killed down there." So I took the jar and I brought it into the woman and I plopped it down on her desk, and I said, "Here they are. What I've told you is true, and I'm laying it on you. I'm not going to be responsible anymore for the care of those children if you are going to deny me the funds to get the tools necessary to clean around the house and take all of the brush and stuff away and make it safe for them." And I eventually got the money, by the way, but I was no longer in financial favor in the church. It was a little hard to get money out of them. That persisted wherever I went. Staff members were always ill-fed, ill-clothed. I had a personal situation where I had an abscess in my tooth, and I was being audited for it. I wanted to go to the dentist, and I was being audited for it. And they spent about a week and a half giving me various auditing assists, what are called touch assists, to get rid of the pain and get me out of it. And finally, it was just I was just delirious, and there wasn't any money for the medical float, was what it boiled down to. They didn't have the money to take me to the dentist, so they were trying to handle it with Scientology. I went to the dentist, and this was in San Pedro. Although I don't recall the name of the dentist, the records are certainly still available if it ever came to that. He told me I just made it. It was abscessing, and it was up into my gums and stuff, and if it had been another day or so, I wouldn't be here to talk to you today. You want to know about conditions here in Florida, in your own city? When I first came back from, my last mission to South Africa, when I came back, I was very, very disgruntled with the church's operations. I refused to take a posting because it just was not within my sense of ethics. So I went back to what was my original job, which was manager. And the person that I had trained to replace me when I went off with mission was now the manager for the Fort Harrison. His name will probably come back to Mick something. Anyway, I had been his senior, and I came back and I said, "Look, I'm fighting this posting until it's handled. I don't want to do anything except do what the policy says, which is I have a right to my old job back when I come off of a mission. But I don't want to take your job, so just put me to work, and if you're willing to fight for me as a staff member, well, I'm not going anywhere." So for several weeks before I managed to get out of Clearwater and go back to Los Angeles on a leave of absence, I set up bunk beds in the Fort Harrison Hotel up to the ceiling and just packed them in like rats.
You mean people?
People. There were rooms that were smaller than the division in this area here that had bunks in them 5 high, and clothes strewn all over, sea bags full of clothes just hammered there. In fact, my wife and I were stuck in a room that was already occupied by somebody because they were out on another assignment for a couple of days, and we had to coexist with all of their things in the room, and crowded conditions. We didn't even have a place to hang our clothes. And this is routine. I'm not talking about something that happens once in a while. When I was in charge of operations in Los Angeles, I used to drill the staff members. We very often had people that were sympathetic to the church that would apprise us of inspections that were going to take place. And if that would happen, if we would get a forewarning of it, we had drills set up to pull the bunk beds out, move the dressers out, ship them over to one of the other houses until the inspection was over, and then bring it back and pack them back in again.
That was here in Clearwater?
No.
I didn't do the drilling here in Clearwater. But that's part of one of the regular drills that the Sea organization has on what is called its watch, quarter, and station bill, which is a list of jobs. It's naval terminology. They have drills on repelling enemy boarders. And Sea Org members are routinely trained on how to do this. So if for instance, security here in Fort Harrison was apprised that there was going to be an inspection, there'd be more Guardian's office personnel running around than you could think of, making sure that everybody got all the evidence out of sight. It would be swept clean before anybody got there. And then a couple of Guardian's office staff member would be put on the inspector to feed them false data, maybe give them reports of their own about conditions, and just generally distract them from carrying out their duties. And this is not something that is just once in a while. It's a drilled thing. It's a training process that Sea Org members went through. Common everyday garden variety training. I think, maybe I'm open right now for anything you want to ask me about. I do have some other things, but I think it'd probably be...
I'll start with a few questions and turn out to my colleagues. I think you're probably the best one to answer this question that I've asked two others. Why Clearwater? And why the United Churches of Florida? And not Tampa, Brooksville, or Miami? And why not we're the Scientologists?
Well,
is the climate that right?
Yes, in more than one sense of the word. You're talking, when you're talking about setting up a base where L. Ron Hubbard might actually come and exist, you're talking about an area that is very, very heavily evaluated in every sense of the word. Who's in local offices? What have they done? I want you to know that every single person on the city council was very, very thoroughly, their background was very, very thoroughly checked to see if there was any stuff in the woodwork that could be used against you. I happen to know the man that purchased the church grounds here in Clearwater at the time. His name was Ron Strauss. He was a musician on flag in the band when he was selected for the mission to come in and do it.
That's something.
Yeah, these evaluations, of course, were done. They're all done in advance. All of this stuff was done in advance. I was personally sent out on a mission with a man by the name of Commander Bob Young by Ron Hubbard to find a base for the Apollo. It was only a rumor, but it was pretty solid to everybody that was on the ship at the time. The Mary Sue had enough of running around in Ron's rusty old yachts and wanted a nice place where she could, have herself a little chicken farm or something. Didn't, of course, work out that way, but I ran all over the Caribbean with another man looking for locations. We went into the places on a cover story. The cover story was basically that Operation Transport Corporation, which is now and never has been anything else but the Church of Scientology, was going to set up a training center where they could do their business management consulting out of. There was another operation going on at the time called the Universal Media Organization, which was a promotional organization. Television shows, slide shows. We did some work for one of the government officials on Aruba, I believe it was. We did a project for them. This is all to lay in a cover so that when the church came in, all of the questions that could be asked and all the investigations that could be done to discourage them from coming in had been done on an organization that really didn't exist anyway except as a facade to waste your time on. By the time you finished running around trying to sort all that stuff in, we were already here, if I remember correctly.
Well, I remember the story in 1975 when you arrived, and I, of course, wasn't an office then, but the story I had that it was you bought the Fort Harrison for a religious retreat for retired ministers.
Yes, well, the actual fact of the matter is what we were trying to do at that time, and Bob Young, myself, Bill Lazzaroni, I don't know where he is now. We were the ones that, and Ron's personal secretary or assistant at the time, her name is Liz Osley, we conceived the idea of the media organization in order to get Ron back out into the public. We all felt it was time that he get out in the public. The idea was, and I used to read the scripts. We'd write the scripts for what was going to go on and what shooting scenes were going to go on, and they would go through Liz to Ron or Mary Sue and be approved for the actions. And the idea was to get Ron out here in the community as a religious leader. In fact, I believe he did a couple of radio shows with some local Baptist ministers when they first came in here. And that the whole idea was, of course, to use the opinion leader policy of the church, which is to get a trained Scientologist alongside of someone who's not necessarily the governmental head of an agent, but who he listens to. Who do you go to when you need advice? As a counselor, you have people that you respect their advice. Well, it's a little too obvious to put a trained Scientologist in the mayor's office. But if you can find somebody that the mayor talks to and get a trained Scientologist next to him, boy, you're in good shape. You can just feed anything you want to along that line. And I assure you, that's done every day. I personally brought 60 people up to the governor's campaign in, I think it was 1974. I was asked by the Guardian's office to provide rehabilitation project force personnel to back one of the gubernatorial candidates in California. He lost, by the way, but nonetheless, I had him up there, and I got a commendation for it. I still have it, by the way, for my actions in bringing Scientology into more good favor in the state of California. And they stole flyers, and they handed out flyers and brought people into these blocks. These were the criminals that Scientology.
Clear, why not? I mean, it was Clearwater the right size, being roughly 100,000 people. Was Tampa too big, or was, say, Brooksville too small, or?
Politics, sir. The reason we found some beautiful locations for the base in the Netherlands Antilles, and ran smack into a man who was in the Guardian's office at the time. I don't know if he still is. His name was Brian Rubinick, and Brian was always a little paranoid, but he was a Guardian's office personnel, and he was very, very afraid of the political situation in the Caribbean. At the time, as I recall, they were storing a lot of oil over there while we were having a warm winter and didn't need it here. So there was a lot of political things going on in that area to make sure that nobody knew there was more oil and gas around than anybody could possibly have dreamed of. So the political situation in every area that was looked at was very, very closely evaluated. You had a situation here at that time, as I recall, the tourist business wasn't doing all that good. There was plenty of property available at a good price. A lot of people wanted to get some money back for the investments that they made because Clearwater wasn't booming at the time. I believe that they did find some things to attack the mayor's office with at the time, although I was running in and out of Clearwater at the time, so I wasn't directly involved except for people who would tell me things in confidence because they knew that I wouldn't squeal on them if they told me something that they could get in trouble for. I understand a lot of the things that I heard from close personal friends who would have been in an awful lot of trouble had anybody known that they had disclosed what they were doing to me. In terms of the rules of evidence, I think you realize what that means. It's not hearsay.
So you investigated the personalities or the temperaments of the local officials and either appointed or were elected when you came in?
No, the whole area. I understand a set of mission orders of the magnitude of, in fact, it was an LRH Executive Directive 500 series. I don't remember the last couple of numbers on it, but this was probably a 15 or 20 page set of step-by-step things that had to be done before the Guardian's office would approve the move. All right, so you didn't have the church just willy-nilly walk in here and sit down. All of these things were very carefully evaluated long before they went into Daytona and started getting in trouble there and moved up here. But as far as I'm concerned, from what I've been able to piece together from the people that I knew that were involved in it, this was just politically a nice place.
Naive town, or nice town. Before we get on the other questioners, you said that we're having a hearing against or for the Church of Scientology, and they are back in the office trying to figure out how to handle us. How do you think they may handle us?
Look for our buttons.
What should I be aware of? And what should my colleagues up in this platform?
Well, I'll tell you, I sure wouldn't want to have any skeletons in my closet. I'll be very frank with you.
Now you tell me.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, may I ask him a question?
They're not of any value once they've been used.
If you got a phone call in the morning, the phone call consisted of, I heard you talking with the gentleman before, I know you have 2 daughters, and they go to such and such a school, would you consider that a threat? If the facts in the case were the truth.
In my case, it certainly would be.
If that phone call came from me, would you take that phone call serious?
Oh, sure. In fact, it would already have gone past the point where you should have been doing something about it.
You mean if you were me,
target.
If you were me, you would not be sitting here, you would be with your family?
You have been classified as an active enemy of the church. There are passive and active enemies, and this is part of the geointelligence training. And I've done their intelligence PR course. I've been trained how to handle you guys if I wanted to, if you were attacking me. In other words, I've been trained to present the church's position in a favorable manner. I've been trained to take everything that you say and turn it around against you if that's what I needed to do. In your particular case, they would have already classified you as an active enemy. You would have done something that impeded the expansion, the progress of Scientology, and you would have gone from somebody who was just in disagreement with the church or was interested in finding out what it was all right about into somebody who was doing something about it. The minute you became active, then you go under the area of observance of geointelligence. That's when they start gathering the data, when you become active. I didn't get sued until I testified, as long as I hid for 3 years after I got out, and the IRS didn't know where I was, and nobody bothered me. But the IRS found me, and I agreed to work with them. And as soon as I did, the day after I put my testimony in the record, it hadn't even been released yet.
Well, Mr. Burfield's
They arrived on my doorstep.
concerned about some threats he has had. I have, unfortunately, no longer live with my family, but I'm concerned that too, and that's why I'm asking you, as a person who has done these things, how they should handle. How may we expect to be handled?
Well, a friend of mine's daughter a week ago turned her in to the Church of Scientology for dealing with me. And a bunch of other Scientologists who had gotten together outside of the authority of the church to discuss the things that they didn't like that were going on in the church. Her daughter is a Sea Org member and went straight into the church and turned her in for the activities, and they pulled her in and grilled her. In fact, she has a lot of money still with the church, so they sent a couple of registrars along with to try to get her to go back in here to Clearwater and get her quote-unquote case handled so that she would be no longer in disagreement with the church. That's a standard qualifications action. There's a qual division. Anybody that becomes disaffected with the church, their confessional holders are immediately gone through, and you attempt to get them back into session, being audited, and get them back in alignment.
A standard procedure then would be, before to stop these hearings, would have been to find skeletons in the closets of the 5 commissioners or possibly the attorney and the manager. Would that be the normal way of someone of influence to stop these hearings before they started?
If you want to know what the Church of Scientology will do to you, read The Art of War by Lao Tzu. because that's one of the required books on the training manual for an intelligence operative.
The whole part of all of the intelligence operation drills and policies, as I mentioned at the beginning and a number of times, will all be put into evidence. Some already have, but there are hundreds more to be put into evidence.
Well, I've alerted my family just to watch themselves, and Mr. Burfield has alerted his family, and I'm sure the other commissioners have done the same, and letting them know that I know if anything does happen.
Sir, if I may, one of the points that just Counselor just reminded me of that I wanted to bring up was that while I was on leave of absence from the church in Los Angeles, I was approached by a guardian staff member. My wife at the time, Reva Biddleman, had parents that lived in Miami. Her father had been a successful supermarket owner. They were very well known and thought of in the Jewish community. We were asked if we would consider infiltrating all of the local charities as fundraisers, using their father's influence in the community to get, go through the family ties, the lines, and what we were supposed to do was infiltrate the charities, do a lot of good fundraising things, bring some money in, and at the same time, impress the charities with our competence and gradually gain some sort of control over them. It was decided about 3 weeks after we were approached that because we were so well known as Scientologists around the world, we had traveled extensively for 14 months for the church top management, bailing orgs out of financial trouble. So we had been approached, and they decided that we were too well known, so they were going to use somebody else to do it. I'd check your local charities. You may have somebody operating in there right now. I was asked to do it.
Okay, let's get a different little track then. If you said if you could pass a lie detector test, you were trained to pass a lie detector test. If you're that well trained, could you then also pass an E-meter test?
Secretary.
That's the same thing.
Yeah.
I know that. But you trained people. To lie.
Yes.
To lie so convincingly and so convincingly well that you could pass a lie detector test.
No, that they could pass the lie detector test on whether they could do it or not. And they couldn't go out until they could. That's how well trained they were. They knew in no uncertain terms when they left that they could get through any customs officials and complete their mission. Customs officials, immigration officials, authorities, reporters, whatever. They knew their job cold. So cold that you could put them on a lie detector and they wouldn't read. And when I say read, I mean the lie detector test would show that they were not lying when they said they could do it.
And how could you possibly fail the E-meter test when you were put back on that lake for auditing?
Well, if you had something that you had done against the church and had never told anybody about, that would read on the lie detector. It's an area that you're not
only taught to lie for specific reason or job or mission.
Okay, there is a difference between active use of Scientology intelligence technology and the use of the E-meter to find out whether or not a person is doing what they're supposed to be doing. In one form, you have like a security check when somebody goes into a company. Often now companies like Radio Shack, Tandy Corporation now uses a lie detector test with regard to the application form that you fill out for employment. So it's in that order of magnitude. A staff member could be brought in at any time. H.C.O. Hubbard Communications Office had the right to call in any staff member and put them on the meter and find out whether they had been doing their job, whether they had been using Scientology standardly or not. And if they failed, take whatever measures necessary to correct that. On the other hand, you had training somebody so well that you knew that they could do their job, and to verify that they themselves knew that, put them on a lie detector. And if they didn't feel 100% confident, it would read. I can't begin to tell you how many hours some of these people spend. I'm sure you've all heard the term tone scale, emotional tone scale. Maybe you haven't gotten into any of that. Well, basically what it is it's a set of techniques where you can bring somebody emotionally up or emotionally down by being able to ascertain what they're basically not confronting in life, what they're not willing to face, take responsibility for. And I used to drill with flashcards with another Guardian's Office staff member on being able to move somebody involuntarily up and down that scale. Just by simply spotting where they were really coming from in terms of their ability to confront life. Those drills are constantly run on Scientology people that deal on public lines. They're done on auditors, and they're done on geointelligence personnel. Only they're modified with geointelligence personnel for situations like reporter. If there's a reporter bugging you, to just, take them up and take them down and just confuse the hell out of them and get them out of your hair. It's not all that hard to do.
That's the problem with the reporters.
And listen, I've worked in intelligence and naval intelligence, and it's not technology that's unknown in this world. It's just modified for the use of the church. It's not something L. Ron Hubbard just dreamed up on his own. It's standard intelligence procedure. Standard brainwashing technique.
When you took money out of the country in phony packages, did you take it out in cash?
The biggest incident that I know of personally was a $50,000 cash shipment that went to Flag when Alex Sibursky was called to Flag in 1971. There are other people that I know of that took it back and forth, but this is a situation where I was in the office and he said, yeah, I'm going to bring Ron $50,000. We had a good week. I think we made $500,000 that week for U.S. gross income. In fact, I don't know whether you know it or not, but when I left Scientology, the Church of Scientology in Clearwater, Florida, had a gross income of $500,000 to $700,000 a week. And I know you people didn't see any of that money.
Neither did the tax collector. How much are they skimming, do you think, in Clearwater?
Well, the policy of LRH is to try to run an organization on 25% or less of the gross income. Just how successful they are now or anything, I don't know. But I know a lot of staff members that ate potatoes and beans while there was money being shipped off to the Guardian's Defense Fund to handle the next enemy that they had created with covert operations.
So that's if you make $1 million, then you would be a week you'd be spending $250,000 here, and the rest would go to L. Ron.
It would be filtered probably through worldwide. When Flag was not here in Clearwater, of course, during the course of the IRS trial, there were some 20-some, or at one time 30-some bank accounts in other countries where money could be sent to. That came up in the IRS trial. And at the time we did that trial last year, they still had about 20 accounts that were active, still had money in them.
Well, a previous witness has said about 10% is taken off the top.
That's just to the Guardian Defense Fund. That's the combat kind of hearings we're having right now.